with Fyodor Lukyanov, the editor-in-chief of Russia and Global Affairs, an international platform, quite influential. He is also the chairman of the Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, which is also an influential think tank which advises President Vladimir Putin. He is a research director at the Valdai Club, a Russian think tank, which is very closely associated with the president. In fact, there's an annual jamboree every year on the Black Sea town of Sochi, where President Putin answers questions to all those who are assembled, to every world leader. And evidently, the press conference can go on and on from 2 or 3 to 4 hours. If you have a question for the president, Mr. Putin has the answer. And Fyodor Lukyanov conducts that press conference. Also, Mr. Lukyanov is a professor at the Higher School of Economics, a leading university in Russia. And today, of course, we're talking about the crisis in Ukraine. Perhaps the minds of the Russian elite, as well as the Americans, have never been as concentrated as today, as since the end of the Cold War about 30 years ago. But we will get into all these questions. But first of all, let me welcome you to ThePrint. Mr. Fyodor Lukyanov, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful that you invited me.
So you are on a Zoom link from Moscow. I'm sure it's snowing outside. Russia is very, very beautiful in the winter. You're in a warm room, I can see. But my first question to you is that Russian troops, about 100,000 troops, are assembled on the borders of Ukraine, a country that is about 44 million people. Is Russia going to war? Why are your troops assembled on the borders of Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think we need to explain a little bit, especially for the Indian audience, which is slightly distant from what is going on here. First of all, you said at the beginning the Ukrainian crisis. This is exactly how things are being described in the West. What is going on? This is Ukrainian crisis. Russia is trying to do something with Ukraine, to deprive Ukraine from independence or to make Ukraine subordinate to Russia or something else similarly bad. In fact, Ukraine plays, of course, an important role in this international situation, but it's not Ukrainian crisis. It's crisis of European security. Crisis of European security arrangements, okay, as they emerged after the Cold War 30 plus years ago.
Okay.
Ukraine, of course, is a very important case, but this is just one case. Another case in the long prehistory which led to this current escalation. And the escalation is about whether arrangements after the Cold War, and the core of those arrangements was that NATO, Euro-Atlantic institutions, de facto were seen as equal to European security. The more NATO, the more security and stability in Europe. That was, I interpret, of course, it was not written down in documents, but it was the sense of what we accepted after the Cold War. And the roots of this goes to 1990, when negotiations about reunification of Germany took place between the so-called 2+4 negotiations, 2 German states at that time, and 4 winners in the second.
But Mr. Lukyanov, what is all this? What is a 30-year-old story, the breakup of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany? What does it have today to do with the fact that 100,000 Russian troops are assembled on the borders of Ukraine, and there are fears that Russia may invade anytime?
Yeah, it has to do much, because starting from 1990, and then you can see different periods, but the trend was very clear that NATO, as a core of European security and stability, as the West understood it, NATO expanded step by step eastwards. primarily eastwards, a little bit southwards, but primarily eastwards, pushing a Russian presence and Russian influence, if you may use this term, this classical term as well, further and further back. And Russia initially, at the very early stage, it was Soviet Union and then young Russian Federation, without big enthusiasm, but accepted this new scheme. But then started to object more and more loudly. And the problem was that no one listened to that. It was not even about rejection of Russian claims. It was just to ignore what Russia said, totally ignore. Oh, that it does matter. And that's why I come to your question: why so many troops on the border of Ukraine? Because otherwise, I'm very sorry, but otherwise there is no way to attract American and European attention to the problem which Russia, for many years and decades, tried to put.
So you're saying
we
that,
need.
Yeah. That you need?
We need to rediscuss some of arrangements in Europe. And since the West is so much obsessed with Ukraine for reasons which we can discuss later, so this is, how I could say, this is instrumental, because you see what happened last year. First military build-up in April led to Biden-Putin summit, the very important meeting.
Right.
Second build-up led to the current situation when the West and Americans, first of all, started to listen to Russian arguments.
So this is about getting the attention of the Americans and the Europeans. That's why you put 100,000 soldiers.
Mostly, yeah, to attract attention, to demonstrate that Russia is really angry, that Russia will not tolerate this kind of philosophy, security philosophy in Europe anymore. I'm absolutely sure it's not about the war against Ukraine, because, you know, I'm not a big military specialist, but if you ask any of them, a real war, if Russia, God forbid, will start to prepare it, a real war will look like differently. It's not First World War or Second World War. It's like rather a Syrian operation or something like this. What we see now, it's a demonstration.
No, what do you mean by that? When you say it's a demonstration, so you're putting your troops there to show to the Americans and the Europeans that Russia is really angry?
Yes, to put it very simplistic, yes, exactly.
So you are really angry about the fact that the Americans or NATO is expanding eastwards towards Russia, yes?
Absolutely. That's fact of life, which Russia said many times before. But again, no one paid any attention to that. So
today, the fact that the Americans have responded to your demands, there is a letter that's come last week to President Putin. On the weekend, the Russians have said that, you know, we've received this letter, we're not very happy with it. What does this mean today?
It does mean that conversation will continue. American response was interesting because, again, looking to the logic I just described, after this build-up, after this escalation, Americans started to or demonstrated the readiness to discuss things which they didn't want to discuss 3 months ago, about placement of units and armament in Eastern Europe, about some zones of de-escalation and security in Ukraine, around Ukraine, so on. That was totally, flatly rejected 2-3 months ago. Now they're ready to discuss it. They are not ready to discuss the political dimension about some kind of obligations not to expand NATO further eastwards. But I think that's at least part of Russian demands are, so to say, not, Russia doesn't expect the US to fill them completely, but just to launch conversation about how we can achieve a situation when all will feel similarly safe put it very bluntly, we speak about peaceful coexistence in Europe again. So the post-Cold War situation failed to produce a stable security arrangement. So the real Cold War as 40, 50 years ago, it's not feasible because of changed circumstances, but something like a peaceful coexistence, partially competition, strategic competition, partially cooperation, that's approximately what Russia would love to achieve.
So in a sense, Russia has at least won a partial victory by getting the Americans to talk about these issues, yes?
Yes, we can say so.
So now you and the Americans, the Russians and the Americans and NATO, perhaps separately on a second channel, will discuss the placement of missiles in Poland or other armaments elsewhere in Eastern Europe, which you believe are part of Russia's sphere of influence.
It's not about sphere of influence anymore. Of course, neither Poland nor Romania nor even Ukraine to a certain extent cannot return to Russian sphere of influence. That's passé.
Okay.
But what is important to, so to say, first of all, to draw a line to stop NATO enlargement.
Where do you want to stop? Where do you want to stop NATO?
Where it is now. So of course, those who joined NATO already, they joined.
Okay.
But it's about to prevent Ukraine, first of all, and probably Georgia or other post-Soviet countries, if they suddenly wish to join it. And it does not mean that those countries should fall back into Russia's sphere of influence. I must say that Russian thinking is now, fortunately, more advanced than that. Okay. It's about that they understand that they cannot adopt policies which Russia sees as threatening to Russian security. So it's about balancing, and if those countries find a way to balance, not just to be pro-Russian or pro-West, but to balance, that's fine. And about your suggestion that we will now start negotiations about technicalities, so to say, military technicalities, not yet, because now those proposals are on the table, but Russian positions so far and Russian diplomats' instructions so far are still very firm, not engage in those discussions before we reach anything like any kind of a political agreement about this future arrangement.
So the Russians are not planning to go to war in the near future. Can you rule that out?
Absolutely not. And if it will happen, I would say that it will mean miserable failure of Russian strategy, because no one wants war, and the war will mean disaster for everybody.
So, Mr. Lukyanov, sitting here in New Delhi, you know, the way I look at it, here are the Russians and the Americans, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin, in a sense, eyeball to eyeball, confronting each other after 30 years, the two leaders of the two former superpowers. Now, I would say that Vladimir Putin is actually gambling with the world, or with, say, the Americans, that he is asserting his presence or Russia's presence on the world stage. So he's gambling by putting these 100,000 soldiers on the borders of Ukraine.
Putin is not a gambler, because gambler, in my understanding, means that you include in your analysis and in your actions a huge part of adventurism. It's not at all his style. He's a very calculated person. And you see that all moves are actually well planned. I don't believe that he has a long-term strategy, because he belongs to those who believe that in current circumstances it's almost senseless to try to have a long-term strategy. But in the tactical and middle-term aspect, I think he knows what he does, and he has a very good intuition when at what is doable.
So he's basing this on intuition?
Yes, he's based on his intuition, not entirely, of course. There are other elements of his behavior, like analysis, like fantastic experience he has, really, and intuition. And I would say this time intuition, the share of intuition is a bit bigger than usually, but he's always been very much intuitively gifted person.
In what way? Give me an example. How is he intuitive about this crisis, for example?
This crisis, I can only guess because I'm not an insider who knows exactly, and I'm afraid no one is, because this is a very much game of the Tsar. But you're calling
Putin a Tsar.
He is.
I just want to focus on this a bit. Yes, this man is making decisions by himself, the president of Russia.
Yes, this man is making decisions by himself. It does not mean that he makes decisions voluntarily, so just suddenly decided. And so he listens to many people. He's very keen to get points, and he gets a lot of points, and he knows how to process them. But the final decision is his. And even those who are very close, that's my guess, again, my speculation, but I think that even those who are close to him, they don't know how the final decision will look like.
So this intuition, you were giving me an example of this intuitiveness of the president.
You know, I cannot give you examples. I only judge based on what I see. And I think that he now, for example, why this activization of intensification of Russian policy came just now. I think many elements came together, starting from his analysis about what is going on in the West. And the West is, of course, not in the best shape now, neither United States nor European Union, for different reasons, but still. I think two concrete examples, concrete events recently played a role. First of all, of course, Afghanistan. I don't mean that American fiasco, so to say, encouraged him. I mean something else. I mean that President Biden, in case of Afghanistan, demonstrated a very interesting skill. He is ready to disregard anything if he believes that this step should be done. So he made this withdrawal delivered enormous harm to American reputation, actually, moral and political. But Biden believed firmly that it was absolutely necessary to get rid of this stuff, and he did it. And he demonstrated very, very clear commitment to this. Second event, not that in scale, but still, I mean, AUKUS, this creation of Anglo-Saxon grouping in the Pacific without even informing other allies. And I think that demonstrated that, in fact, if American administration and Biden personally believe that they need to do something in American interest, they don't think about the allies, they don't think about NATO. They do what they believe is correct. And combined, I think it can bring you to conclusion, I mean, Putin and Russian leadership, that probably in real terms, not in rhetoric, but in real terms, NATO is not that important anymore. And Eastern Europe and Russia certainly are less important for Biden than East Asia and China. And this is the window for opportunities, because Biden probably is interested not to eliminate this problem, not to get rid of Ukraine completely, of course, but to decrease the importance of this issue, which is in Russian interest, actually. So this is a very interesting calculation. And then comes intuition, what you asked me about, because they spoke very extensively twice, at least recently, this meeting in Geneva and the online conversation late December last year.
Right.
I think Putin, who is known for feeling vis-a-vis very well, he made some conclusions about what Biden is standing for.
So, we'll come to China in a bit, but just to pursue this. So what does Putin want, really? He wants to return Russia back to its old sort of, to the fact that it was a power to be reckoned with. Russia is a power to be reckoned with.
No, exactly. He did it already.
Yes,
so now,
is that what he wants, is for the world to believe that Russia is once again a big power like it was before?
No, I think it's not his aim anymore, because it was achieved, by and after Syrian operation. The many people in the world dislike Russian policy, but it's very few who dare to disregard Russia as a power. So in this regard, Putin achieved this already. No, I think now it's much more about Russian positioning in this Eurasian and post-Soviet space to guarantee that all neighborhoods, and those are many and those are different: Afghanistan, Central Asia, Caucasus, Western part of former Soviet Union. All of them are different, and different counterparts play their games there. But in here concretely, this is about Ukraine as the key for Russian perception of security.
But is it about a buffer zone that Putin would be interested in, sort of like an informal buffer zone, perhaps?
You can formulate in this way. This is a little bit too blunt, but this is to guarantee that non-security threat would come from neighboring countries, be it terrorism like in Central Asia, or NATO armament and NATO military build-up like in Ukraine.
Okay, let me come to China. Now, China is a rising world power, second only to the Americans, but very soon, even in economic terms, likely to take on the Americans and to overcome them. The Russians seem to be a very close friend of the Chinese. Now, I would say that when two elephants, the Americans and the Russians, when they fight, the grass in the middle, whether it's Ukraine or elsewhere, gets trampled. So in this particular case, the Chinese are watching and perhaps laughing. Mr. Xi Jinping is laughing all his way to the bank. What does Putin think about this fight that is going on between the Americans and the Chinese?
I don't think that Mr. Xi has any reasons to laugh, actually, because China is in a quite complicated position now for many reasons. It has very little to do with Russian-American standoff. But the pandemic put China in a completely new situation. We have now China, which is actually a pretty self-isolated country, which is absolutely unique compared to what we witnessed since actually late 70s or early 80s. China is confronting enormous pressure from the United States, the growing pressure. Mm-hmm. And we see that nothing changed with the change of administration in the White House. So Biden is as tough on China as Trump, but a little bit less, a little bit more elegant. But actually, the substance is the same. So for China, of course, in this competition between America and Russia, Russia is much closer because China now, unlike what we had, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago, China now feels much more sympathetic with Russia because China is as pressed by Americans now as Russia used to be pressed even for years.
So is that the reason for your growing proximity with the Chinese?
No, the reason of the growing proximity with Chinese is that China is the most important neighbor of Russia. Whatever happens between Russia and the United States, this fact will remain. This is geography, this is geopolitics, and this is economy, this is everything.
But do you also know that your resources are what are at least partially funding China's rise?
Yeah, but I would not overestimate the mutual funding because Russia and China are close. Russia and China have strategically same vision of how to transform international system and how to contain Americans. But those policies are absolutely not similar and priorities are different. So the main principle between Russia and China is never against each other, but it does not mean in all situations together.
So, Mr. Lukyanov, let me ask you here, you know that Chinese troops have been sitting on the border with India at least for nearly 2 years now. It'll be 2 years in April. Now, how do you look at this? If Russia and China are so close and India and Russia have a strong friendship, a strategic partnership, how do you look at this triangle?
Russia is very unhappy about this relationship, no doubt about that, because you're right, Russia needs excellent relationship with China, but as much as Russia needs excellent relationship with India. And in the future, I think when Chinese situation will change and the global situation will change, of course, we will need much more balanced policy in Asia at large, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis, I don't know, Korea, Japan, and so on. What happens between India and China, of course, we know that this is a very deep-rooted in history and in political relationship and many other factors. Russia is highly interested to see China and India to reconcile and to reapproach each other. To what extent Russia can help it, I doubt, frankly, because both India and China are so huge and independent countries that they will certainly settle that themselves if they will do it.
But you know, I'm sure you see that because of the hostility between India and China, and the fact that the Russians are so close to the Chinese, it brings the Indians not to be very happy with the Russians. And when you look at the Russia-US tensions right now, this draws the Indians in a way perhaps closer to the American point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. But what to do? This is a reality of international relations, reality of international politics. I think Russia is wrong, and Russian diplomacy is sometimes wrong, criticizing Indian closer relationship with the United States, because India is a country which follows its own interests and security needs, as Russia does. And in this regard, Russian rapprochement with China and Indian rapprochement with the United States is quite understandable. But it's important to understand, and I'm sure that Indian politicians and Indian security community knows that very well, that it's not about alliances. It's not about alliance between Russia and China. It's not about alliance between India and the United States. Mm-hmm. This is maneuvering, which is absolutely normal and which will be flexible in the future, which will change regarding the changing environment. So I think we should understand, all of us, that the Cold War, the first Cold War, the real Cold War mentality, when the world was divided in stable alliances, and the countries had either to choose one of alliances or to be absolutely, so to say, distant from everything, has gone. So each country wants to multiply and wants to diversify opportunities for development, be it economy, be it political, be it security, and that's normal. So NATO is not a model anymore. NATO is rather an anachronic creature.
Okay, so last couple of questions, Mr. Lukyanov. The 30th anniversary of the end of the Cold War, or the disintegration of the Soviet Union, was just marked in December of 2021. Of course, the world is in the middle of a pandemic. What memories do you have, or what memories do you think President Putin has? And do you think the Ukraine sort of confrontation or tension is perhaps in a sense to avenge the disintegration of the Soviet Union?
No, it has not so much to do with the reintegration of the Soviet Union, Putin is not stupid. He knows very well that Soviet Union has gone forever, and such kind of how to call it, the state or community is not restorable. Mm-hmm. So this era is over, passé. But certainly the collapse of the Soviet Union was the most important, the event, the thing which defined consciousness and philosophy of people like Putin and his entourage. Mm-hmm. And it's not so much about reunification with other countries, it's much more about how to prevent Russia itself from falling back into the mood of late 80s, early 90s, when the value of state was very much degraded in the eyes of society.
And yeah, go ahead.
I think Putin's biggest fear is about this.
Is that the value of Russia was degraded in the eyes of the world?
Not in the eyes of the world, just the opposite, in the eyes of citizens of Russia, as it happened in 1980s when Soviet Union started to rapidly collapse.
So that is Putin's greatest fear, that when the Soviet Union started to collapse and what happened immediately post-collapse, and Russia actually became a very poor country. And I remember those days quite well. I was in Moscow at the time. So you're saying that this is Putin's greatest fear, that this should not happen again?
Yeah, of course, because the history shows, actually, demonstrates very clearly, no one can defeat Russia but Russians themselves.
So what are the ratings like today? The Russian people's ratings of their president?
Official ratings, I think, still are very high. But we know that ratings everywhere, not just in our context, but everywhere, are very flexible. So you see that President Biden was highly popular when he came. Now it's one of the worst results in American history for the president at this point. I would not look at ratings, actually. I think in general, President Putin knows very well that he has entered the final stage of his rule. This stage might be pretty prolonged. It does not mean that he will disappear soon. Okay. But he starts to think primarily about his legacy. And what happens now with NATO, with Ukraine, that demonstrates that those issues he sees as parts of his legacy, and he wants to change situation as it emerged up to now.
Mr. Fyodor Lukyanov, thank you so much for your time. You've been very frank answering my questions. I'm sure there's lots more to talk about, and we will be watching the crisis in Ukraine and how this develops over the next few days and weeks. But thank you so much for speaking to me.
Thank you very much.